What specific financial services use cases do you see moving forward from experimentation to perhaps production grade in the next year or so? What's still missing for things to be adopted at scale?
Well, I think there were probably three really clear use cases in the industry that are moving to production. I think first and foremost, when you think about the interaction with agents, you think about customer engagement, the ability to actually interact with customers. Another use case is risk management. There's a lot of process that goes into risk management today, and at different parts of that process and different parts of the workflow, human beings are engaged where maybe they don't necessarily need to be engaged. And then very similarly, in the compliance reporting space, you can imagine for banks and broker-dealers and insurance agencies and payments companies, there's a lot of reporting that goes into making sure that you're compliant with regulatory requirements. There's a lot of opportunity to take human interaction intervention out of that. And so I think in the next 12 to 18 months, you're going to see more and more production use cases for agentic AI in those three key areas.
And how do you evaluate whether a company, a bank, or a fintech that's approaching you that want to work with you is actually ready to incorporate your agentic workflows or embedded intelligence or AI using your platform? Like, do you also have to screen them out, I guess?
Well, I don't think we necessarily have to screen anyone out. I think the wonderful thing about AWS is that we provide services that anybody can use to make their business better, whether you're renovating existing applications or you're building something net new. But I do think there are some very standard things that organizations need to master before they're really ready to put either generative AI or agentic AI to use effectively in their business in production. The first thing would be, having a solid data foundation. For any kind of artificial intelligence to work, you've really got to have a really solid handle on your data, access to data, who can have access to data. That's really, really key. Second thing that's really important is to make sure that you kind of know what you're trying to accomplish. If what you're trying to accomplish is simply I want to do an artificial intelligence experiment, that's not really a true business outcome. Where people are seeing the most value is in having a very specific business outcome in mind. I want to make engaging with my customers that much more seamless. I want to reduce the amount of human intervention I have in my compliance reporting or in risk calculations. Having that clear business outcome of what you want to accomplish is really critical. The last thing I would say is also, organizations, especially in financial institutions, organizations have to have a very clear idea of how governance is going to work, how the inclusion of AI into their workflows is going to match up to their existing governance models or any evolutions they have to make in those governance models to make it work.
So, thinking about removing steps for humans to be involved, and given the fact that AI is still hallucinating, and the fact that financial services is potentially, very sensitive stuff, you don't want AI to get things wrong and make the wrong recommendation. How do you think about sort of balancing removing the humans and being efficient, saving time, and getting things done quicker versus then running the risk of doing it too fast and missing things?
Well, I think of it through the lens of workflows. And just like you and I have daily workflows that we go through in our operations on the jobs that we do, so do financial institutions, excuse me, and the people that work in those institutions. And in some cases, you can take entire workflows and you can have agents take those over. Excuse me. But in the majority of instances, you're going to have workflows where you can take tasks out of those workflows and insert agents and still have humans in the loop in relation to that workflow. I think that's very important that we bring a practical approach to how governance is done in these instances.
Thinking about, opportunities, you touched on some areas already, but where do you think the largest untapped opportunities exist today when it comes to banks and AI agents?
Well, I think the largest untapped and exciting opportunities is when we can orchestrate agents to automate financial operations. You can think about, my background is in the capital market space, and I come from the clearing and execution side, which means making trades happen and then behind the scenes making the results of those transactions actually happen for the buyers and sellers of transactions. In my experience, over the first decade of my career, we had entire departments within our clearing firm that had people staffed to do very specific tasks, whether that was making sure a dividend got paid on time or a corporate action on a security got handled in the right way. And so, what's exciting now is that we can take some of these things that are literally just tasks where people are taking information and then acting on that information. We can take those tasks and actually turn them over to agentic systems. And so that's really exciting because then we can free up human beings to actually work on things that are creative and accretive to what the business is trying to accomplish from a business outcome perspective and freeing them up from task-based work.
That makes a lot of sense. But in terms of blockers, like what are some of the most important technical blockers that you come across when you interact with banks when it comes to deploying AI and scaling AI?
I think there are typically two blockers that are really important to understand. One is technical, but the other is just operational. I'll start backwards. I'll start with the operational one. If you're going to move to using uh, agents within your workflows, you've really got to have a solid understanding of how that workflow has to evolve and how your written supervisory and operating procedures evolve with it. Because if you're just taking an agent and putting it into a workflow and you're not adjusting how the human beings operate around it and how supervision works, you're not going to be successful. So that's one of the most important things is bringing everybody who has a say in how something operates in the organization, not just the tech team, not just the business team, but the risk team and the compliance team, bringing them together and making a decision about how you're going to operate and supervise things, super important. Now, second, from the technical perspective, what's also important is not just simply taking the agent and glomming it onto the side of an existing application. It's important to make sure that we understand how we're going to incorporate the work that the agent is doing into the existing software systems, what work it's going to take out, and what you can actually retire. If you're just glomming things onto the sides of existing applications, you're not really evolving or fundamentally changing the way that work is done. You're just adding more work to the side of it.
Okay. And you've seen the good and the bad and the ugly, I guess, when it comes to what financial institutions are trying to do. What do you think are the sort of standout things that are the hardest to deal with when it comes to integrating or leveraging the legacy infrastructure that most banks are kind of struggling with and introducing a newer technology like the one that you're offering? Do you see any typical failures or challenges there?
I think the biggest challenge that most organizations face in this regard is that when you're thinking about incorporating agentic AI into an existing workflow, or you're thinking about replacing that entire workflow with an agentic system, remember most organizations are still flying the plane while they're looking at the repairs of the upgrades, and so it can be challenging while you're doing that to say, okay, what am I actually going to do? You can't necessarily take that off the assembly line and put it on a workbench and retool it. And so one of the things that we're very focused on is helping organizations while they continue to run their businesses to look at areas where they can make that evolution and to do so in a safe and sound way. That's one of the reasons why you look at a service like Amazon Bedrock, which is our platform for generative AI, and you look specifically at Bedrock Agent Core, that gives you the ability to build agents in a very safe and secure and isolated environment, and to do so with the right controls and guardrails in place to actually do so successfully.
So I guess you have a lot of tools that people can leverage, but in reality, I suppose the CIO will be evaluating multiple different systems at the same time, and maybe some systems are better for some things and others for other things. How do you think about AI sprawl? How should a CIO consider different technologies and how they should work together over the next year or two?
Well, the first thing I would say is begin with the end in mind. Know what business outcome you're trying to achieve with any kind of an experiment that you're doing. Otherwise, you're just doing an experiment. And so I think that's the most important thing is know what you're trying to accomplish, know how you're going to measure it. Then second, know kind of what your framework is. Like, what is it that you're going to try to accomplish? What tools are you going to work with? How are you going to measure the effectiveness of those tools? So having that framework in place, I think is really important. And last, but not certainly not least, is going back to that conversation we had about governance. Know what your current governance model is, what your written supervisory procedures are, and then any evolution that you have to make in that. When you have those things in place, you have the ability to actually do really solid assessments of tools, the capabilities those tools offer you, any compromises that you would have to make in return for using those tools. And again, the wonderful thing about the tools that AWS is offering is you don't have to make compromises around security and governance and compliance because of the way that we build those services for you and the way that you use those in your own AWS environment.
And I guess the other vendors will also say that they have good security and things like that. But how specifically do you think about, or how should a CIO think about using multiple different vendors? How do you layer them? How do you make them collaborate? Or do you isolate them? Do you use one vendor for a certain part of the business and a different vendor for another? How do you think about managing multiple solutions?
Yeah, I would encourage any CEO to think about it just like you would think about it in your own life. Look at the capabilities that it brings to bear. I'm a golfer. In my golf bag, I have a mixed bag of clubs. I don't have all one manufacturer. I pick the clubs that give me the best set of capabilities for my game. And so it's the same for any CIO that's making decisions about the capabilities they're going to put in their bag from a standpoint of agentic AI. Now, some people do play golf equipment from one manufacturer, and because they like that and the specs or to their specific needs, I would encourage the CIO to think about that as well. If you find a platform that falls within the things that you're looking for from a tools and capabilities perspective, it gives you the security, it gives you the compliance, it gives you the governance that you need from the standpoint of how you run your business, then you're within a safe confine to actually leverage that platform as much as you need. If it doesn't, look for capabilities, look for that wedge or that particular agentic tool that gives you the advantage that you're looking for in your business.